Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here to give you a one-stop video instead of a series on winemaking, so I can try to get it all into one video. The reason I did it as a series before is because I was shooting the video through the whole month-long process. But now that I got all these great clips and photos and whatnot over the years, I can just put all this into one. It is actually a very, very simple process, but there are a few steps involved. So the very first thing is you got to decide what kind of juice you want to use. Is it going to be homegrown and pressed? Is it going to be store-bought? And yes, you can use store-bought juice. I just recommend getting as organic as you can with nothing added to it. And then figuring out what kind of starter you want to use. Because when you're making wine or mead, it is really best to have some kind of starter to add to. Some people will buy little packages of wine yeast. Some people even just use bread yeast. I've never used any of those. I've always just used my own homemade starter. And the first starter I ever made when I first got into doing this was when I was making mead, and I made a ginger bug, which is the same thing as what you see here, except for using raw ginger. Now, I do have a video about making the fermentation starter, how to use it, all the many things you can use it for, and I'll put that in the description box down below. But I'm going to cover it very quickly here. I still recommend you go watch that video to learn more details about it, but you can use any fresh or dried fruit, herb, or even vegetable to make your starter. And I don't recommend using frozen for making a starter because you may not get good results, if any results. And all you need to go with that is some chlorine-free water and some organic cane sugar or raw honey. And either one, but you're going to need to use some type of sugar. And no, you cannot use a non-nutritive sweetener like monk fruit extract or stevia to get that going. It has to have the actual sugar, the carbs, to feed on. Same thing goes with your wine and your vinegar. I just throw in whatever fresh or dried fruit, herb, or whatever it is, just a little bit. It can be a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons into a pint jar. Add about a tablespoon of sugar, top it off with water, and let it set for a few days, and it will start to fizz. Once it gets to that fizzy point, which can take anywhere from 3 to 5 days, it is then ready to use. And when it comes to making wines or meads, if you're making a gallon at a time, you're going to need 1 cup of the liquid of your starter. And then you can just keep your starter going. Now, I have 2 starters sitting out here because I actually ended up using a little from each just so I could refeed them and get them alive. And this was made from kumquats. This one was made from blackberries. And when I get more fresh fruit, every so often, once or twice a year, I strain out the old fruit and add fresh fruit to it. But again, you can make it from anything. I've made them from red clover and dandelions and so much more. And then I mix that with my juice. Now, this particular wine I have going, this is day 4 or 5. I cannot remember. I think I'm on day 5 right now. This is made from all homegrown fruits that I had in my freezer. So I'm trying to kind of clean out my freezer and make more space as we start getting into the new season. It's mostly the grapes, but also some blueberries and some currants. And that's where the color is coming from. If it was just my grapes, it would look kind of a greenish color, a light green right now. Now, what you'll find is when you get your wine going, it's going to start out a kind of a darker color. So here's what it looked like the day I started it. You can see it's much darker. And then as a few days into fermenting, especially once it gets very fizzy, it'll lighten up. And then a lot of times it'll darken again. A lot of it depends on the type of juice you're using. I've made wine out of many different things. Same thing with mead. Mead, if you're wondering, the difference is it can just be honey and water with your starter. But usually when I make mead, I add some kind of fruit to it for flavor. But when you're making a regular wine, it's going to be your juice plus added sugar. Now, the amount of sugar that's added is going to depend on how sweet your juice is. So if you're using a fruit that is naturally very high in sugars, You may not need to add much sugar to it, but you're still going to need some of that good organic cane sugar to help get a stronger finished product if that is what you're looking for. Now, since all of the fruit I've used in this is very, very low in sugar, I use up to 3 cups per gallon of sugar. But now let me come back and talk a little bit about the equipment you need. It's very, very simple. All you're going to need is either Carboy, which is a 5-gallon jug, or like I have here, a glass 1-gallon jug. And you can buy these on Amazon. I'll give you a link, in fact, to a full set where you can get your, in fact, you can get some that have 4 sets, 1 set where it has this, your drilled stopper, and your airlock. And that's really all you need to get started. And I also do recommend getting some bottle brushes for cleaning out the inside of your jugs. Now, a lot of the jugs I have were recycled wine jugs. I mean, they actually were bought with wine in it. So cheap wine, some were gifted to me, some I bought years ago. And you can just recycle those. And it's really the cheapest way to go as far as that goes. But once you have this stuff, you've got it. I really didn't need this cake pan, but I like using, I don't bake in these because they're aluminum, but I like using them for this because if this does bubble over, which can happen if it gets super, super active, then I like to have this here to catch anything that bubbles out. And you also have to keep an eye on your airlock because sometimes you'll have, you know, like the bits of fruit and stuff that can get hung up in here and clog your airlock and then cause it to blow off from the pressure in here. So the airlock is important for several reasons. You need, because what's happening here is you've added your starter to your juice, and it's as it starts getting active and eating through those sugars, it's producing gases, and those gases need to be able to escape. This is why, and I'll show you some close-ups here, you'll see water in the airlock so that the gases will pass through the water and come out, but the water there prevents the oxygen from getting into your wine or your mead, which can then cause it to turn to vinegar, which is not what we're going for here with the wine. Obviously, we want our finished product to be wine. This is why you must have an airlock. If you just put a cap on there, you could burp it, but you'd have to do it a lot, quite often, if you don't want to have that just completely explode on you. Airlocks are cheap. You'll see that they're very cheap. And I highly recommend going this route. And so anyway, for the 1 gallon, now remember, if you want to do a Carboy, which is 5 gallons, you're just going to multiply this by 5. So when I'm doing this, I have to consider all my different measurements. So I'm going to end up using a total of 3 cups of sugar in mine, and then 1 cup of my starter. Altogether, that's 4 cups. That's already a quart. So that means all I need is another 3 quarts of juice. And as I said, you can just use store-bought juice. I've done it before. I don't do it often because I get so much different fruits and things I can make my wines from that it's kind of silly for me to use store-bought juice, but I've done it before just to try it. But that does make it simpler because then you're not having to press out the fruits or whatever. Now, because I use a total of 3 cups of sugar, you do need to be careful when you're adding that much sugar. I never add that much right at the start. At least I don't do that anymore because I find that having too much sugar in there to start with can cause it to take a really long time to get going and may even prevent it from, really starting to ferment at all, because you got to remember sugar on itself is a natural preservative. So this is why I only start off with 2 cups of my organic cane sugar, and I mix it in with the juice and the fermentation starter, and then I fill my jug up to about here. As you'll see in some of these pictures, you'll see it's filled down a little bit low. And the reason I do that is because after this is very active and very bubbly, that is when I add my 3rd cup of sugar by pouring out about 2 cups of the wine and making into a measuring cup. I add my cup of sugar and stir it in. I don't worry about it all dissolving completely. I just want it mixed in there really well. and then I pour it back into the jug. Now, the reason I do that is because before, when I would just add the sugar straight to the jug, which you can do, sometimes it can cause a somewhat explosive reaction, and you're going to have everything come fizzing up and just go all over the place. You're going to have waste and you're going to have a big mess. And I've done that several times, forgetting each time that that was what would happen. So this is why I highly recommend taking some of it out, mixing the sugar in there first, and then pouring it in. Now, the reason you don't have to worry about it dissolving immediately is because eventually it is going to dissolve entirely. Just as it sits there, there's action going on in here. Things are moving around. It is going to completely dissolve, and eventually the bacteria and the yeast are going to eat through all that sugar, converting it then to alcohol. Now, for vinegar, that's when you want the oxygen exposure, because then the oxygen exposure will then convert the alcohols to vinegar. So again, this is why we leave the airlock on for the entire time. Now, how you know that it's done is that this will stop bubbling. Right now I've got about every couple seconds of bubbles going through there. But usually it takes about 30 days. It can slow down much sooner than that, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks. But if you wait until it comes to a complete stop and there's no bubbling at all, which is going to be approximately 30 days or more, then it's done. You've got alcohol for sure. You can stop the process earlier if you want to have that fizz in there. Now, I personally like to leave a little bit of fizz in there unless I know for certain I'm only going to use it for making medicinal extracts. Then I prefer not to have any fizz in there, so I want it to go completely to alcohol and be very strong. And the reason I don't like the fizz in there is so I don't have to worry about it bubbling over in the cabinet as I'm infusing my herbs. But anyway, yeah, you can just taste test it along the way. And you don't want this very full. I'm still thinking of adding more juice to this until it's up to right here at the base of the neck, because I did reserve some juice out when I was pressing all this out till after I added that 3rd cup, which I did do this morning. And so I just haven't added it yet because I wanted to let it sit and kind of look at it. So I might go ahead and add some more juice to that. Now let's talk a little bit about if you're making your wine from homegrown goods. When it comes to the grapes and the berries, I like pressing them out by hand. Some people have a steam juicer and prefer to use that. I personally do not have one, nor am I interested in owning one. I really like the way this turns out when I press by hand. However, it is much easier with your grapes and your berries and your rhubarb if you freeze all these things first, because it will soften it and break it down. And when it's thawed out, a lot of the juice will just come right out as it's thawing anyway. And then it makes it so much easier to press out by hand. And then when as far as the rhubarb, even though I've pre-frozen it, I like to use my fruit press for the rhubarb or the raw apples that I get from my trees. Now, I'll be linking down below to the video I did several years ago on the fruit press that I have and how to use it. But yes, it works really good for the rhubarb, really good for the apples. I don't like using it for the berries and the grapes. So it's all going to be a matter of choice on how you want to press out your different fruits that you're going to use to make your wines. So when this is all done and you like the way it turns out, and you do have a lot of pulp in here, then what you're going to want to do, if there's a lot of pulp, or you've dropped a few things in there, let's say a cinnamon stick and a couple of cloves just to add flavor. Let's say you're making some kind of orange spice, like I've made orange spice mead before, then you're going to want to strain it out through like cheesecloth or a fine cotton cloth or a linen cloth or muslin cloth to get as much of that pulp out as you can. Put the wine back in there. Don't put the airlock back on. Put a cap on it, a tight-fitting cap. Most of your kits will come with a cap that will fit to your jug. An airtight cap, this is important. And let it sit for a day, a couple of days, and let all of the sediments settle down to the bottom of your jug. And then at that point, you're gonna rack it. Racking is super easy. All you need is a long tube. And I did forget to mention this as some of your equipment, but Sometimes you can just go down to your hardware store and buy a long tube, but it may not necessarily be food grade. You can also find those the same place you would find any of your other winemaking supplies. And if you're wanting, make sure you get one that's food grade. I do have a food grade one that I use. And you just stick your tube down in there and make sure the bottom of it, the tip of it doesn't go clear down to the bottom where all the sediments are, because you're trying to avoid that. And then you just create pressure on that by, some people will have a special suction thing to get it to siphon out. You just can suck on it just enough to get it to start flowing. And then what I do then is I have a bucket down below, I have set lower on a stool. I have my jug up here because you want to make sure the bucket stays lower than the jug, and then siphon as much of it out, watching how far down I stick that tube, and making sure I'm not sucking all this stuff up. You're still going to get some of it in there, but it's not that big a deal. But then what you're going to have is a much clearer product in the end. Now, I've done it where I've done that process like 3 or 4 times and got a crystal clear wine or mead. I don't do it that way anymore. I usually just do that once, and I don't care if it's a little bit cloudy. As long as I get most of it out, I'm happy. So it's all going to be up to you. There are other ways you can clarify it. There are some natural ways. There are some not so natural ways to clarify it. Just know that the wines that you buy in the store have clarifiers added to them, and that's how they get that crystal clear look. I've heard of using bentonite clay as a clarifier. Again, to me, it's just not important enough to have it, even though it looks nice and all, it's not that big a deal to me. So that's going to be up to you. You don't have to have it crystal clear as long as you enjoy the flavor of it, or you're just using it for making your own medicinal extracts anyway. It's not going to matter. So here's the deal. Another thing I did want to share is that I also have a video. I don't know how old this one is, but I know it was a more recent one I did on the many uses of homemade wine. Even if you don't drink, you don't have to drink to make wine. Making wine is really a good idea to learn to do the skill and have it on hand because of its many other uses, for marinating, for making extracts, and even for barter. So if you're interested in that, please go check out that video I'll be putting in the description box down below. Now let's talk a little bit about bottling up for long term. So what I prefer to use more than anything is these recycled almond or avocado oil bottles, because they're already dark. They have a square shape, which makes them take up very little room in storage that way. And like I said, they're dark. It's just you want to clean them out with some hot soapy water to get all that oil out. And again, this is where your bottle brushers are going to come into play. So I'll link to a set that I have down below. And then they also come with an airtight lid. That's the other thing. Now, some people will use corks and recycle wine bottles. That's fine. You can do that, but you're going to need to store it on its side. When you use an airtight lid on it, there's no need to store it on its side. I prefer this method. These work really great. Have kept my wines just tasting excellent for years down the road. These are packaged nicely because these are either for barter or for gifting. And so I keep some like that. Another thing you can use, this is actually a very old bottle of some strawberry mead I made. I don't know how many years ago. It was way back before I even started my YouTube channel. And it's fizzy. But as you can see, it's been sitting safely in this swing top bottle. These swing top bottles are great. You just want to make sure you're not buying the cheap Chinese ones, because they're going to be fragile and they can explode on you. I've had people tell me they bought bottles that were cheap and they exploded on them. I've never had these explode. These are the Italian brand, the Bormioli brand, are the same ones that make the Fido jars, that have the same kind of bale wire on them. And you got to make sure you have a good seal here. They originally came with a rubber seal, but I haven't opened this since I bottled this up, but anything that I've opened since, vinegar or whatever it was, I've replaced that with the silicone. in there, because the rubber does break down after a while. And then it stretches out. It just is no good. But the silicone will last for a very long time and still get you that very airtight seal, which is important if you don't want your wines to turn to vinegar in storage. But even if they do turn to vinegar, well, they still have many uses as vinegar. So I hope you enjoyed this video and this simplified it for you, getting it all in one place. And don't forget to check out the other links I'll be putting in the description box down below. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.